Podot. This is the story of a podcast. Welcome to A Pod Too Far, where we watch war movies that made Britain great. And in no film is Britain greater or our upper lip stiffer than today's. It's the naval classic In Which We Serve. I'm Rob Hutton, and I believe that an efficient podcast is a happy podcast. I'm joined from below decks by able seaman Duncan Weldon.
Thank you very much, Roy. So you promoted yourself to the officer's berth there and put me on below decks.
I think one of the things that is very clear about this film is that your accent tells you where in the ship you command.
I was going to throw some more coal on the steamers. You can continue if you're...
But it's true, isn't it? I mean, there's a scene in the middle of this where they're having the Christmas lunches, and it is almost a cinematic version of that Frost Report sketch with the two Ronnies and John Cleese, you know.
Yes, yeah. Distinctly middle class, distinctly upper class, and distinctly working class. But yeah,
yes,
but all on a happy ship
I am
together.
Noël Coward, and I look down on them because except he doesn't, because he's Noël Coward, and he's a good captain. Had you seen this film?
So this is really interesting. So I had seen this film before. I didn't remember it very well. I must have seen this film, many years ago. When we were talking about which film to do, I think we were both a little unsure about it. We thought we should do it because it's one of those big movies made during the war. But I don't think either of us was quite looking forward to it. But actually, it's a really good. It's a really
good film.
Yeah, it's a pleasant surprise to me watching it again.
Yes, and actually, it is obviously it's a staple. It's at the time of recording, and for about 3 more weeks. Actually, it may be longer than that. It's on iPlayer. It's sort of there's a group of films. Obviously, the BBC has decided are sort of essential British films
at all times.
Yes.
All British households.
So it's made in 1941. They start writing a script in 1941. It's made in 1942. Noël Coward is Britain's biggest star at this point, probably. And
a proper star, right, direct, starring. You don't get that anymore, really.
Yes, but he's never made a film before. Mm-hmm. Apparently, he turns in a script for this at the end of 41, and the producer says, "Well, this is a 9-hour script." And has scenes in Paris and the Bahamas.
And I don't know if you've checked the news, Noel, but filming in Paris is going to be quite hard in 1941.
It's inspired by the story of HMS Kelly, which apparently was big news in 1941. Do you tell us about HMS Kelly?
This is Lord Mountbatten's ship. I mean, this film is in many ways just sort of a fictionalized biopic of Mountbatten and his ship, which takes part in all of these sort of landmark operations of the first half of the war, and then is sunk at the Battle of Crete.
I'm guessing Mountbatten probably lived in an even nicer house than Noël Coward lives in.
Yes, and was friends with Noël Coward. And
yes.
I mean, do you know about the costume Coward's wearing? I mean, Coward is wearing... The helmet he is wearing is Mountbatten's helmet he wore in battle. So Mountbatten is very
this is De Niro level
and during the war. The war, you've got to keep going back. This is halfway through the war, and Mountbatten's like, borrow some of my uniform. Obviously this all works out quite well for Mountbatten, who ends up being promoted and all of this. There is a lot of... Apparently, Mountbatten later in life was slightly regretful of this film because many people saw it as sort of a huge exercise in self-promotion.
No. Small exercise in self-promotion. Noël Coward, this is his first time directing a film. He gets David Lean in to help with the action, to do the action stuff, and I think probably to do a bit more than that as well, because there are stories that Noël Coward realised that making films is incredibly boring a lot of the time, and starts only showing up for his scenes, which is very much not what's expected of a director.
So I'm told.
Have you heard the William Hartnell story?
I haven't. Go on.
So this is my favourite story about working with Noël Coward. William Hartnell goes on to be the first Doctor Who, but in these days is a sort of character actor who plays soldiers. He's supposed to play John Mills's brother, who's a Marine, who's in basically one scene. Turns up late for shooting on his first day. Coward is furious, says this is unprofessional, makes Hartnell apologise to every member of the crew, and then sacks him.
Coward, who we've just established wasn't turning up himself by the end of the process.
No, that's different though. That's O2. This is very much the O2 theory.
My sort of favourite sort of side plot in this film is the Daily Express side plot.
I don't know this, but I did notice. So there are moments all the way through this where you see copies of the Daily Express floating in the water at one point. There's one floating in the water that says "No war this year."
Exactly, and that's the key one. So apparently, the Daily Express, which was at the time controlled by Lord Beaverbrook, and was a huge paper, massive circulation, just a ginormous paper controlled by Lord Beaverbrook, very political paper. Apparently, the Daily Express, for whatever reason, took against this film whilst it was being made and decided this was a waste of Navy resources because the Navy were helping a lot with it, kept criticising it. So Noël Coward hit back by including the Express Red, including lots of the film is told in flashback. So you get to put up the Daily Express headline, which didn't age very well, September the 1st, 1939, no war this year. So Coward deliberately puts it in, making sure it's very visible to hit back at the Express. Beaverbrook, it's fair to say, is not a man that takes insults very easily. So he apparently goes up to Mountbatten rather than Coward. He just won't talk to Coward and says, "You have made an enemy for life, and you will both rue this."
And where's the Daily Express now?
Yes.
That's the kind of vindictiveness that I really admire. Yes. On both sides.
Yes.
No, Shay. I know that you. I know that you're very concerned with ships playing ships. You know which ship plays HMS Torrin?
I don't actually. Go on.
Her Majesty's Australian ship, His Majesty's Australian ship, Nepal.
Very nice. Who's of the same class and all? Yeah. All,
right. And yes, this is made with, if not the support of everyone in the Admiralty. This is made with government support. There's this strange thing going on in the British film industry during the war. I mean, again, just you sort of have to remember that there are war films that are made after the war, and there are war films that are made during the war, and this one is made firmly during the war, and it's made 41 and early 42 times when the war is not necessarily going terribly well from Britain's point of view. Are these propaganda films?
Well, I mean, okay, on one level, this is propaganda. It's a propaganda film on the level. It's made with the absolute support of the government. They are lending them naval vessels and military personnel during the war to make this film. And, if you go back, if you look at some of the pictures of the making of it, you've got the King, the Queen, young Princess Elizabeth and young Princess Margaret visiting the studio and, seeing all of it being filmed. I mean, you don't really get a higher level of state endorsement than, the monarch turning up to the filming. So, it's made, it's made with the support of a government at war. And the story, as I'm sure we'll talk about, is very much this celebration of British values at war and British society coming together and sort of, stiff upper lips and stoicism. And we'll talk about the end in a moment as well, how it ends. But is it a propaganda film? Well, yes, I suppose it is, to the extent that it's a film made by a participant nation in a war, deliberately designed to shore up national morale and tell a story with the full support of the government, but it's still good cinema as well?
Yes, I mean, it being, all of Eisenstein's films, after all, are propaganda films made. You're not making very many films in the Soviet Union in the 20s.
Not much art has cinema in there.
Where they just go and do your own thing, I'm very interested to see what you come back with. But there is this odd distinction. So Michael Balcon, who's the head of Ealing Studios, seems according to one writer, to have viewed the government as more of an enemy than the Germans in the early part of the war. Because his line is basically, let us do our thing. We will tell the stories that you want told, but we don't want a man from the ministry standing over us and saying, no, you can't have a British soldier dying here. And so these are, as it were, they're volunteer.
Yes. Ealing
propaganda
Studios
films.
is not conscripted. It's signed
Ealing
itself
Studios
up.
has not been taken over by the government. This isn't Ealing Studios, this one. But none of these studios have been taken over by the government. But on the other hand, they clearly know which side they're on. Yeah. And it's interesting you see this with war correspondents as well, that they're all wearing British uniform. They know which side they're on. And when someone comes up to them and says, look, please don't write about this, they don't necessarily have to be censored. They ultimately...
a couple of things on that thing. So one is, within the Admiralty, you obviously have to cooperate. They've got to run a ship and sailors, and Mountbatten's given them his helmet. I mean, that's less essential war materials than an Australian destroyer. But the Admiralty is.
Could they get the Coldstream Guards?
Yeah, they get the Coldstream Guards. The Admiralty, the army's all helping. Within the Admiralty, though, there is apparently mixed feelings at the highest levels about this film. And some take to calling it "In Which We Sink," and think this isn't a particularly, a particularly heroic story to be showing. And that's what is interesting is, the way the story is told in, it's a story of a ship.
Yeah.
The ship is the central character. It's this ship's war, and we learn the people that serve on board. You see the operations she takes part on. You've got sort of Narvik and the first British disaster of the war up in Norway.
In which she gets torpedoed.
Yeah, in which so you've got a bad start to the war, and then you've got sort of the Dunkirk evacuation, and then
not a bit of the war that had gone well.
No, not a bit. I think evacuation gives away the term. And then being sunk in Crete. So it's not a. If the central character is the ship, and it's the story of this ship's war, it's not been a particularly successful or happy war in many ways.
And yet, it is incredibly popular.
Yes.
When it comes out. So it's incredibly popular.
Well, the Navy take to showing it to new recruits as well from when it comes out until the end of the war. So if you're joining the Navy in 1944, part of your training is, now we're going to watch In Which We Serve, because it's meant to be a very, maybe realistic isn't the word, but a sort of accurate portrayal of life on board a Royal Navy ship.
The one bit of cinema that sort of Britain was famous for in the 30s was documentaries. And so there's a lot of talk about the sort of the documentary style, and actually the first 5 minutes of this film, in which after Leslie Howard says this is the story of a ship, we don't see any of the characters, we don't hear anything, we just watch the ship being put together, which is great. Which is absolutely
we're going back to you liking engineering here, aren't we? Isn't it? I mean, it's not the Dam Busters. It doesn't have a whole hour for you, but it's got that 5 minutes little Rob engineering.
I did not know that that's what happened with rivets when they, that they go in hot and you bang them and they expand. That's all of that is just gold for me. But yeah, so there is this documentary sort of feel to it, and they're using real soldiers. Apparently, there is a moment where Mountbatten looked at the extras who were sailors and said, "No, they're all doing it wrong." And I think basically got sailors in to this is how you do it. And obviously, it is fictionalized, but the Dunkirk evacuation scene does not shy away from the fact that these soldiers had lost and come back in a pretty poor state.
No.
I mean, all of that's very, very affecting, actually. And you can see it's one of these old things where it's sailors looking at sailors who have not themselves had a terribly easy war, looking at the soldiers and thinking, blimey, these guys have been through it. Interesting, because you say it's a story of a ship, and that is the way that it's set up. But it's not really a story about naval actions. I mean, it's not the way the Battle of the River Plate is a.
It's almost a ship as community. The ship has
You never really know where where is HMS Torrin in relation to other ships. Why is she shooting? I mean, if you sort of don't really know what's going on in Norway, if you watch it now at a distance of 80 years, and these events are not fresh in your mind, it's not immediately obvious that Norway is where they are when they're torpedoed. And I think the only bit of it that I could easily place immediately was Dunkirk, because that's the bit of it, and when it comes out, it's incredibly popular. It's incredibly popular in the UK. It's incredibly popular in the US. It's incredibly popular in Moscow.
Really?
So a US war correspondent in 1944, I learned, reported that the most popular film in Moscow was In Which We Serve.
There we go.
It's popular in Spain, fascist Spain, where it's controversial and cinemas that are showing it are firebombed. But it's still very popular. And
I mean, that's the definition of a breakthrough hit. Yes. Stalin's Russia and Franco's Spain, both.
And I think the reason that it's popular is because it is about people. It is universal.
Yeah.
I mean, slightly jumping ahead towards the end, but the scene at the end where Celia Johnson gets the telegram that tells her that her husband is alive, I just think, I guess there is nowhere in the world in 1943, 1944 where you could show that, where people would not recognise that sensation, and it is completely universal,
Are we concluding here that Noël Coward sort of knew what he was doing with scripts? Or...
Well, I think it's
a controversial opinion.
It's odd because there's all sorts of things that I this morning I was reading a synopsis of it and I thought, oh, this sounds terrible. And but I watched it last night and I know it's not terrible. I had tears in my eyes.
Yeah.
When both with Celia Johnson learning that her husband's alive and the bosun learning that his wife has died. I mean, it's, oh my goodness, so affecting. And how real it must have felt. The other thing that I thought watching it is when they were making it, how much burden do you carry when you're making a film like this and you know that everyone watching it is going through this? You know that you're going to be... You don't know that you're going to be Navy training, but you know that you're making this for the wives and mothers and daughters of men who are at sea and... and so you've sort of got to get it right. Yeah. I mean, Tom Cruise doesn't live with that when he's making Mission Impossible. He's not sitting there thinking about the sort of the wives of real IMF. But it's an extraordinary. It is an extraordinary film to make in the middle of the war and when it was made. We keep going back. This was 1942 that this came out. So it was 41, 42. We're talking about making this film. It is not necessarily clear that Britain is not going to lose at that point, but it's not clear Britain is going to win in the way it wins. No, indeed, it comes out. It comes out before El Alamein. Yeah, it's September, but it's being made when British forces, the one place the British army is sort of engaged with the Germans, it's running away from them. And it's an extraordinary film to make at that point. And I think if you were to watch it without knowing when it was made, it would be very hard to guess. I mean, that could easily be a film made immediately post-war or whatever. It's not a... Yeah, it's... What I like as well about the end is that sort of almost optimistic, some Admiralty officers calling it, in which we sink, but... and the ship does sink. But then this sort of... and now they're in new ships and still fighting on. So the amazing speech at the end. Here ends the story of a ship, but there will always be other ships, for we are an island race. Through all our centuries, the sea has ruled our destiny. There will always be other ships and men to sail. I mean, it's just... it's like a Churchillian speech at the from that period, but transposed into film. And you would think that again, you look at that and it sounds corny, but it doesn't feel corny. So let's go to the after action report. I mean, as I normally say, quick dad, they're in a cable car. What's the moment you call people in from? Obviously, I want to be called in for the rivets. Yes. So assuming you're not, they're building the ship, Dad. But actually, it's very hard. A lot of the films that we do, I find we're saying, well, to be honest, you can kind of skip the first hour. Yeah. Not this though. Because actually partly because it begins with the sinking of the ship. Yeah. That is quite exciting. Yeah. That bit. David Lean, knew what he was doing as well, and B, it's where the story begins right at the beginning, and then there's sort of the setup. It's also just worth mentioning that. You're right. I mean, it's hard to pick out a single moment in this film. It works as a whole. But, that narrative structure feels very modern as well. Given this is a film made 80-odd years ago, you open with here's the ship being built, here's the ship being sunk. Now we're going to tell the story in a series of flashbacks interspersed with the present. I mean, that's sort of like Christopher Nolan style messing with narrative orders, which we think of as this very sort of edgy modern way of making cinema. But Noël Coward had that in 1942. Yes, I can't think of something. I'm sure there. I'm not going to say this is the one that invented the flashback, but it is surprisingly ambitious to do with your first film. Yes, especially when what you're known for is theatre. Yes, which Noël Coward is, which is traditionally Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. She's Not So Dumb award. Are there any women in this film at all? There are loads of women in this film. Yes. This is also really interesting, I think. This is half the major characters are women. Yeah. Celia Johnson, her first role, to sort of transferred from the stage, and she gets the whole understated, you don't have to, you're not trying to project for the person at the back of the auditorium anymore. The camera's right on you.
But the amount of women in this film, compared to other films made at that time and afterwards, many of which we've spoken about, must be a deliberate decision.
Yes.
I mean, because this is a film for the British nation, as it were.
The really interesting thing for me about this is the whole people's warness of it.
Yes.
And actually, let's talk about John Mills, who isn't a woman.
Yeah.
We'll come back to him. But John Mills is an odd sort of movie star, and this is him becoming a movie star around here because he's short and he's quite ordinary looking.
Yeah.
He's not Errol Flynn.
Yeah.
But he's a good movie star for British films like this, because the whole message of British films like this is these people are people like you.
Yeah.
We are all in this together.
And we're going to follow orders from people like him.
Yes.
No count.
No. Obviously, you're not a person like him. You will never. Shorty Blake is never going to command his own ship. There is nothing.
Yeah.
There are distinct limits to Noël Coward's People's War vision.
Yeah.
But
John Mills is perfect for that role, and he plays a version of that role in dozens and dozens of films over the next 15 years.
And the whole point is, this is an ordinary bloke.
Yeah.
This war is being fought by ordinary blokes and Noël Coward and Celia Johnson and all of those scenes are the sort of the Celia Johnson Noël Coward scenes, which are the sort of the classic Noël Coward, incredibly clipped.
Yeah.
I think I may have been shot. Sort of style of acting.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's quite a strong theory that Coward basically invented that, and Laurence Olivier more or less said he took it from him. But all of the women are good as well. It is worth saying, I think, for all that this is a people's war film and that it's got lots of women in it, the roles for women in this film are having babies, raising children, looking after the home.
Oh yes.
Knitting. None of these women are going to work in factories.
No.
None of them even get to sort of. I don't think we even see a wren. I don't think we see any women in uniform.
No, I don't think we do. I don't think, which is an interesting decision, given you've consciously made the decision to have lots of women in the film, to then put them in a very sort of traditional.
They are. I mean, there's a line in it where men must work and women must weep. Is it? That is the verse that's here.
Yeah.
So this is both novel in some ways, and in its sort of class attitudes and its gender attitudes, it's incredibly traditional.
Oh yes.
This is not a film after which anyone is going to storm anything. The movie body count is in the hundreds. It's quite hard to know, but the ship had a complement of 300 and only 90 of them survived.
Yeah, back to
various others killed. We see various Germans were leaping into the water. We don't necessarily see the Germans being killed.
No, but this is. Yeah, I mean, it's in some ways quite a bloody film. Yeah. But it's not off-camera violence. You see ships sinking, but it's not that sort of visceral close-up violence. It's sort of hands-off violence in a way.
I was thinking about it in relation to Master and Commander.
In
which is ship-to-ship violence, but it's ship-to-ship violence in the days where ultimately what you had to do was get on board the other ship and then hack them all to death.
Yes. Can't really imagine Noël Coward doing that.
No. There was a whole question about Coward casting himself in this because, with the best will in the world, people said, look, the whole cigarette holder dressing gown thing, you're supposed to be a rough, tough sailor. But he more or less pulls it off.
I think he does.
I mean, he actually looks great covered in oil with stubble.
Yes.
I've got to say, it's like, whoa!
We found your meme for this week.
The Cooler King Award for the most gratuitous American character. There are no Americans in this war.
No.
I mean, partly there are no Americans in this war at the point at which he's writing this.
Yes.
But also, this is not a film about Americans.
No, and you couldn't have... I mean, there's no way you could have crowbarred an American into this film that I can think of.
No.
And
I mean, you can't
needed.
even have the volunteer pilot who's come over, the sort of Ben Affleck like. No, there. And I mean, that said, it's an incredibly popular film in America.
Yes, yeah. And so by the time it comes out, sort of post Pearl Harbor, America. I suppose by the time it comes out, America is in the war.
Yeah.
Although not involved in Europe.
And indeed, its experience of the war has been ships sinking.
Yes.
So that probably helps. And the universal values of sitting at home waiting for the telegram delivery scenes in this.
Yes.
Are tremendous, actually.
Which then become almost a trope in later films, right up to Saving Private Ryan, or you see, at the beginning, the woman getting the letters that your children see.
So I guess that's the universality. I mean, it's interesting again listening to something one of these films that was made for American servicemen during the war. There's this whole thing about British stiff upper lips and the fact that when a chap says his journey was a bit dicey, it means he was torpedoed twice and this kind of thing. But they obviously get that in this.
In which way around does it go? Is it that British chaps have this stiff upper lip and the film reflects that, or is it that we have films saying British people have a stiff upper lip and therefore that's how people think they have to behave?
I would love to know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a mass observation study.
Yeah.
Question there. I did try and investigate the origin of the phrase stiff upper lip for the stiffest upper lip of the world, because there is actually a moment in this film where somebody says keep a stiff upper lip, which I thought, is that the first? That's not where it comes from. But again, you do wonder whether this sort of popularized it a bit. And it's different. I mean, there was obviously the Noël Coward stiff upper lip thing, but actually it's interesting the way it goes below decks as well. And the bosun being told by John Mills that his wife is dead and in the middle of writing a letter to her. Oh my goodness. Mills, who is completely working class, he's very much the Ronnie Corbett in this film, is allowed to express his emotions. He's allowed he actually seems to be sadder. Yeah, obviously he's not sad, but he's allowed to express that sadness. The bosun sort of just says, "Thank you for telling me."
Yeah, almost mustn't grumble.
Glad about your child. And introducing who's in this in a tiny part who went on to be a legend. Who did you spot, Duncan?
Well,
did you spot him?
Who should I have spotted?
Richard Attenborough.
Oh,
Richard Attenborough, who didn't even get a credit.
I did not spot Richard Attenborough.
That's how. So he is listed as young Stoker. He's the one.
The role you cast me in at the beginning.
I had you more as Shorty Blake. I don't know. He's the guy who runs away.
Really?
Yes, and he only gets sort of 3 scenes. Yeah, but you can sort of see, here is a future giant of the British cinema. Yeah. It's just going to...
But not William Hartnell, as we established.
Not William Hartnell, no. I mean, technically, John Mills' son is in fact played by John Mills' daughter, but not Hayley Mills. A lesser Mills, I'm going to say Juliette Mills. But to be honest, this may be her biggest role. So it's the only
I'm
thing...
not sure it goes for the future star.
It's the only thing I've seen her in. I think she does. He's bought it, Sarge, The Best Death.
Oh, there are loads though.
Well, I want to give it to Attenborough again.
Yeah, fair. Okay, fair.
Because he gets redemption. I'll tell your parents you did all. You did all right. But I mean, yes, no, there are loads of loads of deaths, and they're all terrific.
Going back to the point that some people in the Admiralty thought not the most effective propaganda film. I mean, they were wrong, but you could say...
Yeah. But it's interesting that works, isn't it? That actually that it works much better than a film in which this destroyer goes around and single-handedly wins the war.
But yeah, I mean that's the thing. It comes out in 1942. Had you made, this is the kind of propaganda film, if it's a propaganda film you want to make. Sort of, things are going wrong, but amid everything going wrong, people are maintaining their courage, their sense that they're going to win. At the end, they're still confident they're going to win despite all these blows. Had you made a film in 1942 about a destroyer, winning the Battle of Narvik and then, somehow preventing the Dunkirk evacuation and then preventing the German conquest of Crete, everyone, this?
Absolutely, you would have got laughter. And actually, the other thing that is notable, and if we get to the Good Luck Award for Best Meme, it's John Mills listening to Neville Chamberlain telling them that there's a war, and there's a fantastically self-pitying moment from Chamberlain. Oh, you can imagine what a blow this is for me. And he said, it ain't exactly a bank holiday for us. That's a really interesting piece of sort of pomposity pricking.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
Neville Chamberlain is not the biggest loser of September 1939. You know, there are... And... It's not highly memeable.
Well, you know, we've got Noël Coward, but other than that,
yes, I would take gifs of Noël Coward and Celia Johnson, sort of keeping their faces immobile. Nastiest Nazi? No Nazi. No. Well, I mean, there's the pilot is machine gunning sailors in the water. Do we think? Do we think that happened?
Well, look, it may have happened occasionally, but I don't think it would have been a sort of standard.
It seems quite a lot of effort if you're a Nazi pilot and you see 8 guys clinging to a raft. You know, how many dive runs are you going to make? You're quite a long way from base, and you know you've sunk the ship. Take the win. Yeah, no, there are no Nazis. Again, we were talking about this with Dam Busters, but again, it's a film where you never see the enemy except at a distance, and not even then, really.
No.
You know, I suppose maybe that's how the naval war felt some of the time.
Yeah, you know, But I mean, you mentioned Master and Commander before. This isn't Master and Commander. You know, these are guns with very, very long ranges. Yes, I know.
The Dam Busters dog prize for the most problematic moment.
I mean, it's not a moment. There is the whole general role of women in the film.
Yes, that's what I've got. Men must work and women must
weep.
That is, I mean, you're remaking it now. You know, even if you say, well, obviously they weren't on the ships then, you'd have Wrens. Mills's wife would be working in a factory and this kind of thing. They would, and that's not that has not aged terribly well. The Loose Lips Award for Best Lines.
What are you going to go for?
Well, I mean, I'm going to go for Leslie Howard's narration at the end. There will always be ships and there will always be men, you know, and this is...
You know, but I think you're right, you are right, you're obviously right. I think it's a great ending point to the film, and it sounds ridiculously pompous, and if you just read the script, it sounds pompous, but you could say the same for some of those wartime Churchill speeches. I mean, you could say the same for some Shakespeare, the Band of Brothers speech for Agincourt from Henry. You know, it's that sort of speech.
It has to work in the moment.
Yes,
you know,
and it's really well delivered, and
And actually, Noël Coward. I mean, on that Noël Coward's speech to his final speech to his sailors, you know, which he sort of tries to put across the idea that, in a sense, you know, it's not so bad that the 200 of the crew died because they got to go down with the ship, and she was a good ship.
Yes,
you know, and in a sense, it's not so bad that we got sunk because you're all going to go, you know, all going to go and be better sailors.
Better ship.
putting a brave face on it. Judgment at Nuremberg. Any war crimes?
I'm not sure there is.
No, this is a sort of fairly honest war.
This is the theme with naval films that we've done.
Is this the operation that changed the course of World War II, Duncan?
No, but it makes no attempt to claim it is, does it? You know, you've basically picked a destroyer. Which, you know, to be clear, a destroyer is a small ship.
Yeah,
you know, it's a big ship. It's got 300 people on board, but it is small compared to a battleship or even a cruiser. There are lots of destroyers, and we've picked a destroyer. We followed the destroyer for the first 2.5 years. We've showed what life is like on a destroyer, and that's what the film's trying to do.
It's interesting at the end that when they say there will always be more ships, you get a shot of an aircraft carrier.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, you know, you got HMS Torrin, but coming back with the Ark Royal, and then you'll get her. Worth dying for. How does this film stand up?
It's a really good piece of cinema.
It's actually
the script is good, the action sequences are good, the story is good. It's got moving moments. It's beautifully shot.
I completely agree. When we were talking about this, we were both a bit ambivalent, and actually watching it, I was all of the stuff that Noël Coward wanted me to feel, I felt. You know, it's sort of tearful and proud, and my lip wobbled, but ultimately remained stiff. That's here ends the story of a podcast, but there will always be other podcasts. For we are a podcasting race. Thanks for listening. That was A Pod Too Far with me, Robert Hutton, and Duncan Weldon. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe, and if you liked it, rate and review us. You can drop us a line at podtoofar@gmail.com or on Twitter @podtoofar.
Next week, The Dirty Dozen.